The Forbidden Tale, a comprehensive study on lesbian, gay, bisexuals, LGB in Iran. Chapter 4 1.2 Roots of Sexual Orientation. In order to understand the phenomenon of same-sex sexual relations, the origins of such attractions needs to be explored. The scientific debate pertaining to the ethology of homosexuality and its root causes, and exploration of sexual tendencies is a complicated issue outside the parameters of this research study. As previously discussed, there we can find a wide range of homosexual theories and several schools of thought. See Chapter 2. Many of these theories are not well understood and accepted. There are two main theories as to what are the causes of homosexual attractions. One is that a homosexual orientation is essentially dictated by genetic and/or biological factors. There is some suggestive evidence widely accepted and worth pursuing that homosexuality is innate. Simply put, people are born gay. The other theory is that homosexual attractions develop primarily as a result of psychological and environmental influences and early experiences. At the end of the day, there are possibly multiple factors that ultimately coalesce and contribute to homosexuality. What was of significance to the interviewers was to know whether or not the participants thought there were significant events or contributing factors that led to their sexual orientation and what approach and history of this identity influenced their self-image. The analyses of the interviews show that some sexual minorities consider their sexual orientation as just a feeling they were born with. If this is the case, these statements give credence to the theory that genetic and/or biological factors are at play. Many saw their homosexuality as a natural phenomenon in the sexual orientation parameters as it fits solidly in human biological concepts of involuntary behaviors. In this regard, they refer to the ancient history of homosexuality in Iranian poetry and folklore, claiming that it has always existed. Some examples include the ancient Roman paintings and many other examples referred to by ancient poets and literary figures. Based on the participants' feedback about their childhood games and moods, which are interpreted as the genetic and internal criteria of sexual orientation, some of the participants said from a young age how they vividly recall exhibiting gender non-conforming interests and tendencies in comparison to their peers. In other words, their interactions, friends, favorite games and personal habits and characteristics were different from the norms expected from their physical gender. The earliest antecedent of same-sex attraction has already been addressed. J. Michael Bailey, a psychologist from Northwestern University, and Canadian psychiatrist Kenneth Zucker published a seminal paper on childhood markers of homosexuality with their controversial 1995 review article in Developmental Psychology. Bailey and Zucker hypothesized that homosexuals would show an inverted pattern of sex-type childhood behaviors. Little boys preferring girls as playmates and becoming infatuated with their mother's makeup kit, little girls strangely enamored of field hockey or professional wrestling. The research findings had been expounded upon by further studies. In several studies, scientists have documented that these sex differences are largely impervious to learning that there have been some studies that bear this out. Numerous studies have since replicated this general pattern, revealing a strong link between childhood deviations from gender role norms and adult sexual orientation. It has only been relatively recent that developmental scientists have conducted controlled studies with one clear aim in mind. That is to go beyond mere stereotypes and accurately identifying the most reliable signs of later homosexuality, what researchers refer to as pre-homosexual. In looking carefully at the childhoods of now gay adults, researchers are finding an intriguing set of early behavioral indicators that homosexuals seem to have in common. Both lesbians and gay men often have a history of cross-sex typed behaviors. Little boys becoming infatuated with their mother's makeup kit, little girls enamored with sports usually associated with men. On the other hand, There were participants who emphasized, although indirectly and during the course of the conversation, environmental factors that were present in single-sex environments or the familiar masculine realm, where most socialization revolves around someone of the same sex. At this juncture, same-sex relationships exist on platonic levels. As one individual stated, "We didn't feel different then." The all-boys school and growing up among boys gave a sense of normalcy. All the boys were intimate with each other to some extent. We occupied one end of a spectrum, but even those at the far end didn't regard us as freaks. This means that after an individual is in absolute male environment, such as military services, or absolute female environment, female student dorms or girls' boarding school, he or she is cognizant of their sexual interest in towards someone of the same sex. One major reason may be the inaccessibility to relationships with the opposite sex, partially due to the societal restrictions from traditional religious families. Heritable biological factors do interact with environmental experiences. The impact of the surrounding environments on the formation of the sexual tendencies, interests and behaviors goes back to the significance of sociability and behavioral factors. In other words, gender stereotypes and the structure of acquisitive roles transferred into an individual as he or she is being brought up are eventually internalized. Various and subtle degrees of misogyny abound are encouraged and accepted as a natural part of childhood. Some homosexuals or bisexuals revealed their experiences of being victims of sexual orientation violence, abuse, and harassment, and these painful memories became lifelong memories resulting in lingering trauma. Sexual abuse harms them in ways that are similar and different, but equally harmful as such type of memories. They find homosexuality as the comforting tool. Amongst the LGB that participated in this research study, a third group was encountered that considers sexual tendency neither a biological gene-oriented claiming phenomena nor a male or female-dominated environmental issue. This hybrid group of LGBs live in a world full of love. For this group, sexual tendency is tantamount to love, and love is neither genetic nor acquisitive, but a natural phenomenon which scientists has not been yet able to recognize. The concept of love cannot be measured within the unnatural frameworks. Examples of such an analysis can be found in the remarks by those who believed in new emerging mystic paths. They argued that with all its broadness, love cannot be limited to a certain sex, role, or tendency. In other words, they live in a world of romanticism, and for them, nothing matters but love. (1.3) Homosexual relationships, how it began. In this section, we deal with the analysis of early homosexual relationships based on the information acquired through the interviews, and then we'll proceed discussing the details of such relationships. The first sexual relationship usually starts in upper secondary school, although there are some rare cases of it starting in lower secondary school. Such relations gradually mature into more serious sexual interactions. At that age, people are still in the age of innocence. Adolescence is characterized by profound changes in several areas. The maturation of intellectual thought, substantial psychosocial development, and a series of physical changes that reflect neurological and endocrinological processes are intertwined in a process referred to as puberty. This maturation process is associated with increased levels of sex steroids. During puberty, the body releases hormones that stimulate ovaries to start producing the female hormone, estrogen. The most obvious physical changes during puberty reflect the influence of powerful hormones. The attainment of adult secondary sexual characteristics, breast maturation, testicular and penile maturation and pubertal hair, body composition changes, and attainment of fertility are all easily noticed. Awareness of one's sexual orientation crystallized around puberty when all the hormones started kicking in. The hormonal changes triggered by this onset of puberty bring about intense feelings, cravings, and sexual arousals. Although individual differences range widely, for LGBT Iranian adolescents, exploring these natural sexual feelings juxtaposes society's stern message that having sexual desires and contact with the opposite sex is forbidden and religiously prohibited. The dynamics of lesbian relationships. The question of gender roles is one of the most complex issues in contemporary Iranian society. Iran, by and large, is a country with a stern patriarchal social setup. Although it is changing, many women still live under an arduous shadow of century-time honored patriarchal subjugation. The sexual orientation on homosexuality in Iran often focuses on discourse centered on homosexual men. Lesbians and bisexuals are discussed less frequently. Lesbians face discrimination first as women and then as lesbians. Since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, some of women's legal rights in Iran have been restricted and stripped away. In addition to the restrictions on their rights as women, lesbians in Iran face further restrictions due to the criminalization of same-sex conduct along with widespread social intolerance. This dual discrimination contributes significantly to the abuses they face. Although most historical records leave lesbians invisible, lesbian relationships sometimes parallel those of heterosexual relationships. Undoubtedly, many of the issues in lesbian relationships reflecting the ups and downs of intimacy are also present in heterosexual relationships rather than specific to lesbian relationships. Lesbian relationships cautions against stereotypical assumptions and dispelling the heterosexual cliches and stereotypes that women are more nurturing than men and women reveal their feelings quicker than men. Above else, society expects women to find and have a relationship, fall in love with a man, have children, and live happily ever after. This is the amorous myth read to all females. Instead, lesbian relationships find and have a relationship and fall in love with a woman. Social expectations for women to marry, coupled with the lack of economic and legal independence, women account only for 16% of the labor force, mean that lesbians as women will often have decisions made for them by males in their family. This can lead to situations where lesbians live their entire lives in marriages in which non-consensual heterosexual sexual acts are chronically forced upon them. Being a lesbian is fraught with danger. Under Iranian Penal Code, punishment for musaheke, or the rubbing of female genitalia between women, is 100 lashes. Their love is in direct conflict with the Penal Code. In addition to the restrictions on their rights as women, lesbians in Iran face further restrictions due to the criminalization of same-sex conduct along with widespread social intolerance. Although not enforced and even tolerated, if caught in public, women can be also flogged for same-sex kissing. Lesbian community members in the Islamic Republic of Iran have grown up not only in an unflinching patriarchal society, but in a society that devalues and criminalizes their sexual orientation. They are subjected to a confluence of legal discrimination, social harassment, domestic abuse, and acts of violence inflicted by both state officials and private citizens. Whilst there are shared causes between homosexuals and lesbians, such as the profound differences in Iranian social context, intolerant religious indoctrination, labels that clearly identify homosexuality as unforgivable sin, the impact of the strictly patriarchal structure ideology on lesbians needs to be acknowledged. In addition to the above-cited difficulties, lesbian relationships have a longer duration than male homosexuals' relationships, and in some cases it has led to cohabitation and committed relationships. In 1948, Kinsey observed that long-term homosexual relationships were notably few. Now, although long-term gay-male relationships may be more common, the fact remains that they are typically not monogamous. This study follows the classic research of McWhorter and Matteson reported in The Male Couple, 1984, which found that not a single male pair was able to maintain fidelity in their relationship for more than 5 years. The vast majority of media reports about homosexuality in Iran are based on accounts of torment and oppression from gays and lesbians who have fled the country. Some have voiced that in Iran, if you want to be different, you have to hide it. Then, you are free to do as you please, or rather just so far as they do not become aware of you and your way of life. Whilst their experiences of those who are able to flee are to a certain extent representative for some of Iran's homosexuals, they are hugely different from those who either choose to stay in the country or do not have the opportunity to leave. An important factor in this research study is that some of the interviewees were not locals. Amongst the participants of this study in Tehran, most were young university students or professionals, and some were not originally from Tehran. Their independent lifestyle, somewhat free from the prying eyes of family, the financial pressures and concerns makes cohabitation a better option for individuals. Moreover, in a semi-traditional society, young university students sharing lodgings is deemed normal and acceptable, as often seen in Western societies. Thus, whilst two individuals from the opposite sexes are not legally and conventionally encouraged to cohabit, the cohabitation of two males or two females, whilst masking their sexual tendencies, falls within the parameters of normality. Some have the means to create parallel lives out of sight of their relatives or friends. The sexual and emotional aspects of the relationships of sexual minorities were such a core vital part of the comments that people were ready to divulge them. Babak, 23 years old, Tehran. A tough experience that totally changed my life happened in my university days. There was this fella at university and we liked each other very much. I admitted my interest in him and apparently it was fine with him. But he was straight. Anyways, we were in a relationship for 2 years, out of which 1.5 years was very difficult for me. I became attached to him. I lost my life. I had a studio where I used to sing. I stopped that altogether. I stopped composing poems and started drinking. It was mostly because I had started a wrong relationship with a straight person. What was of prevalent importance in all of the gathered interviews was that in the analysis of the status sexual minorities in Iran, special attention was paid to the social and cultural contexts and the place of residences of the LGB individuals. This study observed that the type of emotional and sexual relationship experiences of people within the 3 targeted cities is somehow linked to the sexual context of the city and that differences were attributed to the particular culture prevailing in each area. LGBs in Tehran, in comparison to LGBs in Isfahan and Mashhad, enjoyed more freedom of movement for dates in parks or have privy to certain gathering points and weekend parties called life where they could see one another or meet up. Although these small pockets of relatively safe zones allow quick public displays of affection, the fear of the authorities is also present. They are still fraught with risk. In terms of municipal and urban contexts, Isfahan is a traditional Iranian city and as with many cities in Iran, the subject of sexual minorities are so uncomfortably taboo that most of the inhabitants are not even aware of homosexuality's mere existence. Given the taboo nature of the issue that is cloaked in religious ideology and society's unawareness of LGBT's existence, it was perilous locating individuals willing to participate in this research study. This was a challenging and thorny hurdle. One reason for this difficulty was the heightened level of distrust. This distrust on one hand makes them more fastidious in their choice of a sexual partner and on the other inevitably shortens the life cycle of their relationships. The feeling of being under surveillance, both by other Iranians and the state, has taken a toll. It is worth noting that during the telephone and face-to-face interviews, we quickly surmised that many do not even trust other homosexuals. The interviewers were instructed to contact them through cyberspace in order to pave the way for the face-to-face interviews. Once the face-to-face interviews took place, it was much easier to contact their friends and partners. With respect to short-term relationships, research findings showed that interviewees expressed the onerous difficulty of finding a partner. The challenge of finding a steady partner weighs heavily on Iranian gays. In some cases, they initiated a relationship with their partner's friends, and after one quick episode of sexual contact, the relationship was terminated. Cheating and lack of mutual commitment in a relationship are rampant amongst sexual minorities. Not only amongst the homosexuals themselves, but long-term meaningful relationships are rare. At times, due to unwanted relationships with non-homosexuals, they suffer from irreparable loss and trauma which can be life-sustaining and haunting. The underlying reasons for these numerous short-term relationships' spin cycles are plentiful. A heterosexual union may be rooted in religious and cultural bylaws that reinforce monogamy long after the excitement has dissipated and left the bedroom. Couples are forced to push beyond the immediate gratification of sexual desire and find more meaningful forms of pleasure and release. Conversely, same-sex couples, who are the antithesis of what monogamous union should be by most traditional standards, are an abomination of the sacred one-man, one-woman union. Gatekeepers of these standards did not hold same-sex couples accountable to the same societal norms and expectations that are the foundation for the modern family. The twin pressures of the historical constructs of monogamy competing with social non-acceptance of same-sex relationships often produces an additional layer of anxiety and chaos in the relationships, producing limitations in free relationships. Since people are deprived of the security in a long-term relationship and cannot have a sense of belonging that normally follows a long-term relationships, they turn to short-term temporary relationship, which in some cases manifests itself as a sort of sexual profligacy. 1.3. The impact of homosexuality on family. There is no scientific evidence that sexual orientation, be it heterosexual, homosexual, or otherwise, is a free will choice. When we are born, we are endowed automatically with a set of expectations and values silently handed down from our parents and society to the family. Enmeshed within these social entities are the culture, loyalty to the family, and the family reputation. Any judgment or view of the family members can significantly affect the individual's actions. Familial power and meanings, which organize the social and cultural statuses, are active and form a basic part of one's identity. The family extends its influence into as many spheres as possible, impacting identity and lifestyle. In Iran, once the children are married, the two families virtually merge and have extensive rights and obligations vis-a-vis each other that are close to a sacred duty. During the impressionable formative years, one learns from watching, observing, and eventually internalizing what are good values and expectations. As the primary teacher is the family plays a direct or indirect crucial role. The random happenstance of where one is born and what family a person is born into plays a determinative role in one's identity, what language will be utilized to communicate, prescribed social status, and what religion to follow, all which make up major parts that forms one's identity. In this research study, identity was a pivotal phenomenon formatted within the above-mentioned factors. Identities are a complicated series of human material and spiritual belongings. Identities as a combination of sociological and ideological constructs are fabricated within prescribed social statuses that both sexes acquire either by the roles they play, the biological differences attached to each sex, or the nature of rights and obligations that these pressures imposed on the sexes. We are also taught that our sexual identity is bifurcated. In other words, the idea that gender is male and female with no shades of grey. We are also taught that the gay portion of the human sexual spectrum is morally corrupt. Starting from birth, through the stages of childhood, youth, young adult, and old age, socialization is a continuous process of different sets of perceptions and prescriptions. The family structure plays a crucial role in this phenomenon. Kinship relations predominate in interaction, and individual identifies himself with these primary groups. The role of the family invariably depends on the pulls and pressures that they are imposed knowing or unknowingly on each individual family members, assumed roles and the social, economic, psychological, and political effects on their assumed roles. Homosexuality within the family is problematic because social life is often fabricated within the social experiences that are characteristics of men. A sexual orientation outside the classic male-female dichotomy disrupts the continuation of an oppressive patriarchal male-dominated and male-female relationship. An identification of being gay can have a dire effect on families who are unflinchingly unaccepting of their child's homosexuality. These are not problems uniquely confined to Iran. Every year, thousands of LGBT teenagers in the United States who come out are thrown out of their homes, and a quarter of homeless people in the UK identify as LGBT. For the vast majority who identify as LGB, the attitudes and acceptance or non-acceptance of their family and society is a much bigger problem. The early years of life lay the seeds of recognition of their orientation and the beginnings of realizing and knowing their sexual identity as LGB. The remarks made by these people themselves during the research study revealed the pain when they realized that their sexual tendencies are different from others and the decision to hide their sexual tendency. LGB individuals spend some wasted years on this unbalanced fight of hiding their sexual tendency rather than time better served for individual and personality growth. Shielding the family from discovering the individual's sexual identity is the most calamitous issue of sexual minorities. The fear of creating familial problems is interwoven with the very fabric of LGBT lives, leading to intense emotional, psychological, and spiritual trauma. The participants referred to the family encounters as the toughest experience of their lives and an enormous challenge. The one issue that affects all LGB individuals at some point in their lives is coming out to their families. For Muslims, this can be an especially difficult decision rendered easier by largely keeping it in the shadow. See Chapter 2 for more in-depth analysis. The myriad social hurdles are enormous. The family, the fear of shaming their family and losing community respect, the stigma of sexuality, and a hardline view of homosexuality. The Iranian tradition and the patriarchal culture are bracing reminders that these entities are powerful structures to be shouldered by the individual alone. Many families struggle with balancing and navigating deeply held religious and personal values with the love for their LGBT children. The juggling task of pretending and hiding one's sexual orientation from the family has been the greatest and saddest torment of sexual minorities. The pain and angst inflicted on sexual minorities within the safer space of the family is far greater than what they have experienced in other places such as a school. For most LGB individuals, the sacred family bloodlines that provide many of the narratives that most profoundly shape their lives is now up against and in direct contrast to relatives that will never be ready to accept this sexual orientation as it is glaringly at odds with everything one has been taught. For many LGBs, this has been an acute source of anguish and deep trauma. Our research study revealed that the dread of punishment by stoning seemed to take second fiddle to the obtrusiveness of societal dictates and obedience. Once again, this is persuasive evidence of the high importance of familial and community social approval and adherence. Within communities and family members, homosexuality is considered to bring shame upon the person and his or her entire family, with dire consequences for all friends and family members. The most common social and economic repercussions are that female relatives cannot marry due to a lack of willing suitors, male relatives may be fired from their jobs, and social standing of family can be compromised. For those families who are aware of the person's sexual orientation, they have resorted to various desperate tactics in a vain attempt to change the person in their genuine belief that the sexual orientation is mutable condition or simply transitory phase. This research study revealed that majority of the interviewees experienced this familial reaction and response. The number of participants who had a different experience was less than the fingers on one hand. Once the family became aware of the person's sexual tendency, not only did their response result in the situation not changing, but also, in most cases, the family became more oppressively controlling. Their genuine belief is that they can change person into what they assume is a normal family member with normal sexual desires. Even in those families who are more flexible and open, they are not ready to welcome homosexuality with open arms and hugs. Thus, as long as this readiness is absent, the family will continue to furiously denounce and resist intersexuality that does not encompass men and women. Some families are simply more sympathetic than others. For those families who believed in accepting the individuals, it is their fear of their relatives, neighbors, and relatives' negative judgments that often spur them to encourage the individual to be clandestinely discreet and considerate. The social backlash and community unacceptance are major repercussions. Paramount to these fears is the idea of bringing disrepute to the family dignity which outweighs the family member's physical and mental health. Sexual orientation is seen as the ultimate sign of familial humiliation and a serious threat to family dignity. This means that not only is the very notion of dignity of the individual is dependent on respect for the societal frameworks operating around gender roles, but also these sexual tendencies also control the dignity of the family and relatives. For the sexual minorities, this fear of scandal, disrepute, mockery and ultimately rejection casts a shadow of guilt spilling over into social interactions. Such manifested reactions within the family structure are very much affected by the social, economic and cultural status of parents, educational level, cultural prejudices and religious beliefs, but they have all been more or less on the same scale. This means that even within the families that are open families, the immediate reaction often has been of profound discomfort. Families often seek therapeutic and interventionist therapy, hoping for a treatment to change the person's true nature. Some quotes from participants. Nargis, 27 years old, Mashhad. If I were born once again, I would have liked not to be a homosexual. So far, I have done everything possible. I have contacted these safe houses to let me in as I escaped my house. But instead of sheltering me, they started lecturing me. They told me maybe you are not a good girl. Be a good girl so that you are not beaten up. A bisexual participant, 19 years old, Isfahan. Principally, boys are interested in the same sex. I have a friend called Ahmad. He had too much sex with the opposite sex that now he has turned into a homosexual. Even when he wants to talk, he prefers talking to someone from the same sex. Akbar, 35 years old, Tehran. You know, I didn't like having such tendencies, and that's why I thought of marrying someone from the opposite sex. I was thinking maybe this could relieve me from my tendencies. At first it was okay, but then I realized that I really can't do it. In addition to the rejection and lack of understanding, sexual minorities reported more serious and violent confrontational reactions within the family. In some cases, this has led to outright ostracization and exclusion, vilification and deprivation of any inheritance rights as an offspring. In some cases, the homosexual person, despite having a clear attraction to a person of the same sex, gives into a complicated relationship with a person of the opposite sex just to appease family and friends. In some cases, the participants said they expressed their dissatisfaction categorically with such relationships and have never ever entered into a relationship with a member of the opposite sex. Amongst those who have had such relationships, it did not lead to any sexual contact and from its very grim ominous beginnings were emotionally dead-end relationships void of sentiment. The relationship did not lead to any sexual contact. The analysis of the interviewees' responses also exposed a disturbing pattern. In some cases, the participants caved into the family and friends of the family's demands and married someone from the opposite sex, irrespective of their sexual tendency and despite having a clear gratification towards those of the same sex. Although the consequences of such marriages are depressingly predictable, it is worth noting that the discontent and angst resulting from a forced marriage inflicts another blow on the already damaged fragile identity of the individual and adds another layer of psychological trauma to an already deep wound. For lesbian sexual minorities, the prevalence of these reactions by family and society has transformed their already fragile minority within minority status even more precarious and thus multiplying the inequality, physical, sexual and psychological pressures. The myriad social challenges facing lesbians, accompanied by societal exclusion and non-recognition, flourishes within a patriarchal Islamic discourse that emphasizes gender differences, gender inferiority and gender boundaries that restricts women's lives now has heightened. Lesbians experience violence. The oppressive gender discrimination, which not only manifests itself in cliché male and female gender roles, now thrives with dodge intensity in patriarchal Iran and even operating within the sexual minority community. Some face physical abuse. In dealing with the dual pressures of patriarchal gender discrimination on one hand and society abject non-acceptance of their sexual orientation on the other, lesbians who are now in the inner throes of struggling with an undesirable self find themselves on a yet bigger battlefield whilst they are woefully unequipped and lacking any knowledge or capacity to fight the discriminating structure. Even if the individual takes refuge in social activism, the women's rights organizations and movements has been of little use. Based on the personal accounts of the participants, most of the safe houses run by the state welfare organization have rejected some girls who have been victims of domestic violence. Undoubtedly, some of these girls have been subjected to physical abuse due to their sexual orientation. Most safe houses have simply failed to address the physical violence. Given the beginning of the normal part of sexual developments and curiosities and further awareness of one's sexual orientation, no two individuals' mode of sexual communication and exploration is the same. At the outset of recognition of one's homosexual orientation, coupled with confusing inner conflicts and sense of modeled shame, there may be a response to the external pressures. People normally start a trial and error phase, such as initiating a sexual or emotional relationship with someone of the opposite sex. These relationships may temporarily blur the individual's true tendency. The difficult analysis of self-acceptance become more complicated and leading to forced marriage, forced engagements, and relationships that reflect expediency than sentiment, and thus leaving everlasting trace on the person's mood and character. .4. The rejection part. Apart from the core fact that the participants collectively shared similar mental images of their family's conceivable reaction, what is worth noticing is the steady pace of the progressive normalization process of homosexuality and the individual's acceptance of himself as a definite novel definition of self. This is akin to the normalization process, further discussed under strategic reaction. This is where self is redefined as what I am and is no more what I have to be. This phase, if it occurs, appropriately can be the first step in a stabilization, if not it can lead to the denial of sexual identity. Although positive attitudes toward gay men and lesbians have increased over recent decades, attitudes toward bisexual individuals are relatively neutral, if not ambivalent. Despite the inner desirability of the image of being gay or lesbian, bisexuality comes with increased mental chaos and complications. Bisexual people, who have been at the forefront of LGBT rights throughout history, are still too often left out of the conversation. As far as we can reasonably ascertain, in the case of Iran's bisexual community, this current study is the only research and analysis which have been conducted on bisexuals as a recognizable group. Often the validity of bisexuality is undermined. It has been opined that bisexuals are confused or in transition regarding their sexual orientation. Bisexual men and women face a disproportionate rate of physical, mental, and other health disparities in comparison to those who identify as exclusively heterosexual or exclusively homosexual. A bisexual person struggles to place oneself in a defined frame, and after a series of failed frustrating attempts, one stops the inner search and usually, if not mistakenly, forges oneself in a more solidified frame which, depending on one's tendencies and culmination of past experiences, can either try to fit neatly into homosexuality or heterosexuality boxes. These labels often only further divide and ultimately erode full acceptance. Kat Ayun, 33 years old, Tehran. Nobody in my family knows about this. I mean, no one knows that I have such a tendency. It's absolutely impossible for me to tell them what my tendency is. I'm sure they will reject me. They will kill me. In any respect, in addition to their position to the sexual spectrum, what is a common denominator to all of the above-mentioned individuals is the adversarial encounter of an acrimonious social reaction. The most important underlying factor in their everyday lives is the fear of discovery from a family member or other key figures in their lives, people with whom they have mutual interactions, and the plausible reactions of avoidance, non-acceptance, and unrelenting hostility. Their biggest worry is the potential for painful estrangement from the family and that the people whom they love will not accept them once they come out. This is a particularly difficult and unpleasant territory to navigate, especially if one's family or parents are also the core of one's existence. A lesbian participant, 27 years old, Tehran. If I could go back to the past, I'd rather never talk to my high school friends about this. When I see them on the street or somewhere, I am disturbed. All the time I'm thinking, what if they are talking about me? I have not told my dad. It is very tough for him to know that, well, now my daughter has such a tendency. It's very difficult for me if my father gets to know all about this. But if I had a choice, I would have liked all those around me to know, but I'm hiding it. No one understands me. Whenever I talk to my sisters or when they come over, they behave in a way as if saying doesn't do anything which may expose the issue to our husbands. I am always in fear. That's why I distance myself from everyone. I spend time mostly in my room, alone. This fear of scandal, infamy, mockery and eventual final rejection casts a shadow over the social interactions of sexual minorities. Moreover, family reactions are affected by the social, economic, and cultural status of parents, e.g., educational level, cultural prejudice, and religious beliefs, but all have been more or less of the same scale. This means that families, even the most open ones, have a therapeutic and interventionist reaction towards the coming out and often force them seek therapy in a futile attempt to change his or her true nature. Part of the stigma against homosexuals is intrinsic to the Persian language, which has two different words for homosexuality. This has led to much controversy within sexual minority groups concerning definitions of homosexuality or hamjinsbazi. The study identified the basic difference between these two important narratives in relation to this research. Homosexuality is seen as an acceptable sexual tendency in an individual, whilst hamjinsbazi is seen as an undesirable form of a relationship in reference to the participants' friends and relatives. Both concepts are intangible and vague without any clear definition. The LGBT community uses hamjinsgarayi, literally means the state of being interested in the same sex, while the government and state media uses the term hamjinsbazi, which has a derogatory connotation as someone who plays with people of the same sex. The closest but not universally agreed upon translation is the pejorative word faggotry. It is possible to be gay and live under a repressive regime that always threatening to out, whilst government and state media uses the term hamjinsbazi. .5 Identity, coping strategies. The very nature of sexual minority, with conflicting ideologies for any person belonging to this group, something that the individuals try to soften and frame in order to normalize it. To fulfill their search for identity and a particular lifestyle, homosexuals undertake different strategies to compensate for existing gaps in their relationships so that they can carry on whilst maintaining sexual and mental stability. One such strategy is to try and normalize oneself. Some examples include denying one's sexual orientation, burying sexual orientation thoughts, attempting endeavors to change sexuality, and pushing oneself into the opposite sex. Many engage in heterosexual activity merely to appear socially acceptable. These strategies of discarding any vestiges of one's sexuality only serve as a temporary and ultimately unsatisfying distraction. Beneath the bravado, their true sexual orientation remains. What has been emphasized categorically by the research team and the fieldwork was the endeavor to understand and translate these lived experiences into the analysis at hand. The chaos resulting from the use of inappropriate labels comes to light when the person considers himself a homosexual, whilst his behavior and history of relationships actually revealed that the label bisexuality was a more fitting definition. Most of the respondents from the sexual orientation category of bisexual shared that they were unaware of this existing sexual nature. Many had previous sexual relationships with both sexes, and many masked the reality of life as a bi individual. As previously discussed, bisexuality is still common with scorn, with many people believing bisexuality does not exist. Being bisexual is one of society's taboos. It is still widely underrepresented, plagued with misconceptions, and riddled with prejudice and stereotypes. As some bisexual people do not feel they fit into either the homosexual or the heterosexual world, by choosing the gay label, it garners some relief by allowing the individual to have a more defined frame. Bisexuals may feel pressure to label themselves as homosexuals instead of occupying a difficult middle ground in a culture that does not readily understand this orientation. The reasons for this are twofold: the unawareness of the existence of bisexuality, and the imagined relative acceptance of only being gay or straight, rather than bisexual. Iranian society and LGBT surrounding community as a whole is unable, unwilling, and more importantly, uninterested in comprehending these sexual orientations that flatly contradict societal norms. Any sexual orientation that operates outside the defined binary of male-female relationships is disparagingly viewed as a disturbance, a shame, a disease, and/or a disorder. Disparaging labels that some African leaders have routinely employed when describing LGBT individuals. When one considers the steady beat of difficulties for LGBT, the external stresses of family and friends' potential rejection, growing up in a world oriented towards heterosexual norms and values, the unyielding tenacity of religion and its unforgiving stance against homosexuality, the laws and omniscient presence of death, and the negative influence of the social stigma against homosexuality. It is of little wonder that these powerful repercussions are observed and internalized. In the course of socialization via school, friends and family, the LGB individual is cognizant that his or her sexual orientation has been labeled by society as unnatural and problematic. The impact of these unwritten cultural and conventional laws is not only reflected on the individual's self-image and plausible consequences of his behavior, but it is also visible in a range of unnatural and at times dangerous reactions ranging from self-repression, denial, and engagement in high-risk behavior, all of which can have adverse effects on mental well-being. (1.6) The influence of religion and religious beliefs. Whilst attitudes toward LGBT community around the world have recently become more tolerant, Iran remains one of the countries resistant to change. In some jurisdictions of Iran, even homosexuality as a topic of discussion is shunned, which makes it quite formidable for LGB advocacy groups to form and effect change. The religious infrastructure in Iran produces a political and legal superstructure defined on the basis of traditional Shia jurisprudence. This ideological system rarely allows other voices and upholds strict religious interpretations. Iran as a traditional society lays emphasis on religion and magic in behavioral norms and values, implying continuity, deep links with a real or imagined past. Religion plays a pivotal role. Most family structures are based on religious teachings and often centered on the teachings of the Prophet. The heavy impact of religion on the identity and lifestyle on individuals is already highly influential, but on LGB individuals it is highly grave as Muslim religious beliefs are fundamentally homophobic. The more religious and biased the family, the more pressure is imposed on the individual. Religion is not just a matter of personal belief and prayer. It constitutes a public sphere that includes the nation itself. Considering the social and biological status of sexual minorities, religion creates a more powerful leverage for sexual control. Based on what has been explored and discussed, we can only conclude that religion, the ratified laws of the country, and the society's traditional context are all significant factors contributing to the restricted life of homosexuals. This leads to unbalanced relationships, mental disorders, and finally, different lifestyles and identity formations. This identity includes some elements which have been the focus of this study based on the data compiled during the fieldwork. Evidently, the newly shaped identity follows particular behavior strategies and performance which have been analyzed extensively under strategic actions. Given the religious influence in the religious city of Mashhad and the taboo nature of the issue, these twin forces shed light on the impact of religion, identity, and lifestyle of an individual. In addition to its contextual influences on family and identity formation, religious beliefs on Mashhad city are also more dominant, and the issue differentiates sexual minorities in Mashhad than from other cities. The religious beliefs of these sexual minorities not only make them resistant against accepting their inclination, but also they make them insistent on not revealing their orientation. The stigma attached to homosexuality in Islamic communities can have profound effects on those Muslims who self-identify as gay. In Iran, most people follow basic Islamic concepts in their social lives, and therefore sexual relationships are also considered valid unless they clash against acceptable inviolable social norms. Homosexuality is not a tolerant, let alone accepted social norm. 26-year-old bisexual from Tehran. I do nothing to impress the God. I neither say my prayers nor read the Quran. I don't fast, I swear to God, and I fuck in the ass. Religion acts as another contributing layer of pressure on LGB communities in Iran. As stated in Chapter 1, religious beliefs have always been amongst the main factors and actors that are at a crossroads with progressive social reforms and transitions, creating an obtrusive interference in homosexuality acceptance. Iranian society places a high value on conformity where expressions of individuality are frowned upon. There is an emphasis on upholding social norms with defined rules for men and women that exist in a binary sphere. Homosexuality challenges this social order. For millions, their blind submission to an intolerant brand of religion that emphatically states homosexuality as an unforgivable sin is significant. When the sacrosanct social norms within the parameters of approved Islamic rules are threatened, religion serves as a moderating tool and entity for organizing and controlling social behaviors. For the family, homosexuality is akin to renouncing one's religion, called apostate. Creating mental ambiguity for the individual, religion can have a pressurizing effect on one's personal, social, and sexual decisions. Interpretations abound in the constant debate on whether it is acceptable to be gay in the Islamic faith, and many struggle reconciling one's spirituality with one's sexuality. Those gay Muslims who conceptualize their sexuality as immoral and or wrong can understandably struggle for self-esteem. For instance, take the premise of the widely accepted view that homosexuality is a sin. Islamic religion unequivocally and unambiguously views homosexuality as a deviant behavior. For LGBT individuals, the beginning of recognizing their sexual orientation is fraught with an existential religious and spiritual despair. Many are under no illusions about the strength of homophobia within the Iranian culture. The internalized sense of religion that is the core of one's existence, the societal and religious concepts of a male and female as the only socially acceptable relationship in the Islamic framework, makes the individual judge his natural feelings through the prism of a blanket condemnation of homosexuality and the religious structure. Clearly, the stigma attached to homosexuality in Islamic communities can have profound effects on those Muslims who also self-identify as gay. فاصله. It is easy to see how belief in the negativity of homosexuality from the perspective of one's faith could conversely cause some gay Muslims to develop internalized homophobia. For those LGB individuals who are on the receiving end of societal homophobia hate, their internal inescapable struggle that sometimes only alters after years of facing fixed sexual inclinations has in turn led many to religious rejection or lack of belief in religious punishments. LGB individuals are always subject to human interpretation, and interpretations may vary according to time, place, and social conditions. In this regard, most of the respondents advocated more ethical interpretations of the religious text, which exalt pluralism and the value of difference between God's creations, and resisted the dominant interpretations of the Quran used by scholars to condemn homosexuality. Muslims invoke the story of Lot in the Quran, comparable to the story of Lot in the Bible, to argue that Islam condemns men who love men. Many gay Muslims have a different interpretation. The story condemns cruelty, not any particular sexual act. In an attempt to reconcile their faith with their sexual orientation, they distinguish between homosexual acts and homosexual identity in order to affirm that the fact they were born non-heterosexual is part of Allah's plan. Thus, their homosexuality is an expression of divine will and not a personal choice due to lust or perverse desires. Additionally, a small number of Islamic scholars, mainly in the West, have started re-examining Islamic teachings on same-gender sex and have concluded that the blanket condemnation is a misinterpretation. Nevertheless, for many, their choices are limited. Hold steadfast to one's beliefs, be yourself as you are unable to carry on masking or deny your homosexual tendencies and thus weaken your beliefs in the hopes you will progressively forget them. When the individual is lacking familial and entourage support and acceptance, and the supposed solace of religion is absent, leaving the person isolated and rejected, it is not at all surprising that one loses religious beliefs and turns to receiving support from non-secular sources. Paradoxically, this religion factor sometimes renders people towards more conservative ideology. LGB individuals who have carried the fear of negative family reaction and judgment attempt to be compatible, going so far as to mimic heterosexuals' behavior, speech, and clothing style. The conservatism can result in short-term relationships. The spirit of Islam is all about empathy, tolerance, and understanding, and yet LGB simply has no positive theological frame of reference in Islam. The acceptance or endorsement of homosexuality is perceived as contravening key tenets of Islam. And yet, the need for a religion that acknowledges and accepts faith groups in LGB contexts, which tends to be secular, is lacking during this epoch of homosexual acceptance. This has attributed many to seek a new way forward to metaphysical power and alternative spiritual ideologies in one's life instead of the dominant and governing religion of Islam. The concepts include humanism and belief in human dignity as a real religion, or inclination to new-fashioned mysticism believing in sexual fluidity. Perhaps this century can be a historical story of remix, tolerance, and coexistence that will go beyond superficial support and #solidarity. As the selected anecdotes below have persuasively shown, the journey to acceptance is brutal, Below are a few poignant voices from the LGB community from the field. 23 years old gay from Isfahan. Well, we are condemned. We live in a Muslim country, we have Muslim parents, and naturally we are Muslims. We believe in God and afterlife, but it's weak, and I don't say my prayers. But I have faith. I do not deny God. Nevertheless, I have relationships, I have sex, and I have always tried to separate these two dimensions. For me, the issue of being heterosexual or homosexual is not related to God, religion, and hereafter. I don't think I have committed a sin. My religious beliefs are weak, but I have accepted the issue easily and I have no problems. 31 years old lesbian from Mashhad. During my childhood, I remember I went to the mosque with my mom or my dad, but after facing these problems and issues, guarding against God was the first feeling I had because I was really under pressure. God could have created me like other people of my sex. I could lead a normal life, get married and have children. I could live easily. I still have the same feelings. The issues we face sometimes really makes us ignore our beliefs, but this problem made me lose many of my beliefs, many of them. I would like to die one day and only ask God why. Because there are some people I am in contact with and some people are like me with the same problems. I am really fed up. "27 years old lesbian from Tehran. Now I delete my groups, Telegram LGB group. Again tomorrow I search in the groups to find something better. I delete my groups, turn off my cell phone. I think I have bought 20 SIM cards so far and I have burned them out. I ask myself to leave it, not to do it anymore. I open the Quran. Tomorrow, again I am searching the groups. I think I have changed 10 cell phone batteries so far. I just search by my cell phone from morning till night. My mom says, you may come back Arash if you pray to God. You may find a job, go to work. Exposure of homosexuals to law. LGB individuals are attacked and harassed in Iran. The laws are stacked against them. They are vulnerable to harassment, abuse and violence from their families and society. There is an internal and inescapable connection between religion and sexual norms in Iran and the flourishing legal system and draconian laws which serve to punish those who do not respect religious and sexual norms. Legal sanctions are perpetrated by the government, the judiciary system, and by non-state actors such as schools, communities, and families. Iranian laws provide no protection against discrimination or harassment on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. LGB individuals are denied the legal right to be who they are. The Penal Code of Iran uses the term lavat in reference to the name of the Prophet Lot in the Quran, and the story of Sodom. Its association of this story with homosexuality is debatable and controversial, but suffice to say that the religious authorities in Iran have chosen to interpret it in this way. With reference to Iran's penal code as discussed at length in Chapter 1 and in the author's previous books, there is an indisputable gap between penal ratifications and executive realities. Recent studies indicate that punishments and penalties for having homosexual relationships, see Chapter 5, pedestry, pedophilia and lesbianism are met with a combination of corporal punishments such as flogging. In case the deed is repeated and evidenced, the homosexual person will be sentenced or stoned to death. Although it has been years since such a sentence has been passed, and it seems the justice system and the police tolerate the LGB community as long as they do not congregate in large groups and remain invisible. Paying attention to laws in today's current Iran continues to weigh on the LGB community. Although these laws are considered as human rights violation, The history and background of their implementation in Iranian society goes back to 2005. The feedback from the interviewees indicates that they think the lifting of such punishments is unlikely. When the sexual minorities were asked about their knowledge of laws, many exhibited ambiguities about the details on implementations of the regulations, even though some of the participants used the words such as execution or stoning and flogging. As we observed, as many of the interviewed sexual minorities have an inflated feeling of being in control, a sense of relative carelessness, and no recent cases of execution or stoning, many considered the occurrence of such an event quite unlikely. Cocooned in the safe zone that is located in a secure circle has pushed many to exist within a protective mode, falsely leading many to believe there will be protection for their privacy and for their wish to keep their sexual relationships confidential. Despite being individually concerned over the laws, many had carved out a social niche that merely emphasizes remaining a hidden and invisible member of society. It seems that the Iranian authorities usually turn a blind eye to the gay community's escapades, but even this de facto borderline tolerance can be risky. The impuissant forces that implement control, power and supervision on sexual desire, although external and compulsory such as laws and police, often transform into external provoked forces created by the person himself. The individual is now in a vortex of self-censorship and loathing. Strangely, although there is a concern or fright about being arrested by the police or the sanction of death, this fear is eclipsed by their worries of disgracing the family and or the disclosure of their sexual identity that had been carefully hidden or disguised for years. Considering the above-mentioned issues, one can have a clearer image of the effect of the law on the individual's life. There is an evidence that the police actions are only against the gathering of sexual minorities venues in public places, cafes or parks in the city center that draw the police to their large crowds. These parks are well-known hangouts for the LGBT community. During the interviews, the participants revealed they were relegated to visiting well-reputed public places like special parks in the metropolitan cities of Tehran, Isfahan, and Mashhad. This sort of security response is a classic method to set a moderate and radical atmosphere of traditionalism and to control human communities at various intervals for reasons such as social interest or supervising interactions. It is a response to the complexity and the interrelatedness of both old and new by tackling such threats. However, the primary goal is not to make arrests or inflict punishment, but ostensibly to disperse large crowds in well-known public places for security reasons. Despite the atrocities being perpetrated against gays in Iran, a deeper analysis on such a projective reaction proves that in reality, the heterosexual public's awareness of homosexuality is low. No matter what rationale are put forth, the veracity of sexual minorities' existence cannot be denied or ignored. Yet, what is important here is that obliterating the appearance of sexual minorities is not meant to disguise or cover up their existence. Rather, the strategy may be an attempt not to highlight their existence and thus garner legal recognition and international media attention. The governing security system does not insist on drawing attention to this group that defies all acceptable norms of sexual behavior. As the former Iranian president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad once stated, "In Iran, we don't have homosexuals like in your country." This eyebrow-raising statement may not exactly be false. As homosexuality is illegal and punishable, the idea of someone living their life openly gay in Iran is difficult to imagine. Ahmadinejad's now infamous assertion was flat-out erroneous, as there are plenty of gay Iranians living in the shadows. It is just that the government chooses to ignore them, at least until it doesn't. Dispersing homosexual groups and preventing them from assembling in public places for occasions such as birthdays, recreations, anniversaries, anniversary of creating Telegram channels, etc., shows the length Iranian society will go to keep sexual minorities swept under the rug. It is done to appeasing the majority who are terrified of and repulsed by homosexuality. Our research team witnessed the omniscient threat of police security. The police and morality enforcement forces interrupted the field study several times, causing participants to quickly scramble in order to avoid possible recognition. It is worth mentioning that measures were taken differently in each metropolitan city like Tehran, Mashhad and Isfahan, and even in various areas within the city. In addition to the difficulties securing participants who were willing to be interviewed, this cloak and dagger routine when the police interrupted made the interview process additionally laborious. During an interview, a gay man from Mashhad shared his feeling. Communities of sexual minorities provoke the current susceptibility based on their type and context. Gatherings for celebrating birthday and anniversary trigger various police reactions in case transgender people or those who with special makeup and clothing are present. Especially in Mashhad and in Tehran, I have heard some good things have happened for homosexuals, such as parties and other issues. But Mashhad and both cities are home to a shrine of important religious figures are horrible. I don't know why at all. Predictably, we discovered that sexual minorities' sense of trust has been eroded owing to traumatic experiences of police arrests and attacks at parties or in public places. Building trust with the interviewees for the face-to-face conversations and interviews necessitated the field study researchers to employ additional time and energy. During the research, many cancelled their visits at the last moment even after many attempts were made for arrangements, owing to the chronic fear of discovery and mistrust. In particular, the team members in the field study in Isfahan encountered these last-minute cancellations with alarming regularity and on numerous occasions. Therefore, researchers made greater attempts to select larger homosexual samples. Interpretation of the interviews indicated that sexual minorities' concerns and anxieties were not specifically limited to governmental security forces, but to the potential disclosure of their sexual orientation to the hidden enclaves of family, friends, and relatives. (1.8) Military exemption, chance or way of defense. As previously mentioned, being openly gay creates an incredibly adamantine living circumstances for individuals. Simply having an effeminate appearance sends out an invitation for trouble, let alone coming out. Coming out as gay men has consequences in Iran as homosexuality is amongst the biggest taboos on social and legal levels. However, the taboo transforms itself into a paradox if and when the issue of serving in the military arises. Normally, once a young man reaches the age of majority, 18 years of old, a 2-year military service is mandatory. All healthy and able male high school graduates or dropouts are mandated to serve in the military if they do not succeed in the university entrance exam. A card is issued upon completion of a citizen's 2-year service. This card potentially can make life much easier. Without that card, an Iranian man cannot officially buy or sell anything, cannot participate in formal public sector activities, nor can he be employed by the government or qualified to obtain a passport. Some companies in the private sector tend to refrain from recruiting men who have not served in the military. Depending on one's geographic location, educational or marital status, sometimes the age is lower than 18. The compulsory service is sometimes not favored due to its long-term duration that people are quite reluctant to serve and its restrictive conditions. Some try to find means to avoid it. More affluent families would go above and beyond to circumvent the military service, be it through bribery, undergoing attempts to be smuggled out of the country, inventing false pretenses of illness, or many other ways people created to escape the military service, attempting to fit in as exceptions so they could be excused. Exemption from serving as a soldier entails special laws and regulations that occasionally are modified and moderated. Thus, the status of a great number of people can possibly be modified by changing a few words in a paragraph. Serving as a soldier is considered as a complicated issue in analyzing problems of sexual minorities in the military. The nature of garrisons' closed environments and the 2-year compulsory serving time can trigger homosexual inclinations. The process of receiving an exemption is time-consuming, consisting of providing evidence for being transgender or homosexual. The individual must undergo required medical and mental evaluations prior to commencing the 2-year experience. Sometimes the homosexual person will lie about his sexual role or position, pretending to be the feminine partner or having a special makeup and clothing so that he can win the court case and receive exemption. In such cases, homosexuality is not considered as a biological sexual inclination, but an outward manifestation of what is deemed as an effeminate appearance. In addition to makeup, clothing, and appearance, an individual's size is the determinative ostensive sign. Homosexual individuals with large and masculine bodies are less likely to win at court. Should the examining officers or physicians come across any evidence of queerness, they refer the soldier to be an appropriate official for further evaluations. If the psychological diagnosis confirms the individual's homosexuality, an official permanent exemption is issued for him. More often than not, a thorough and clearly humiliating and stressful rectal exam follows the mental evaluation. If the physician's observations provide evidence of occurred same-sex intercourse, it is then written formally and submitted to the military. In some cases, further detail-oriented examinations come into play, so the decision-makers can be certain of the applicant's queerness, making sure the claim of homosexuality is genuine rather than a ploy to escape military service. The participants in the researcher study recounted experiences of relentless humiliation and degradation as the price paid in order to receive the exemption card. They reported mandatory classes in groups of 20 or more. In reality, the mandatory classes function as a platform to spew out anti-homosexual ideology through abasement and shame, and the advisor tried to convince them to change their sexual orientation, return to heterosexuality, and that their same-sex desire is an illness. Participants spoke of belittlement, accusations, and suppression of their different ideas and discussions as recurring experiences that they were subjected to in the classes. According to the feedback received from the participants, in addition to attending psychology classes, the individuals underwent another examination and many had to submit to hormone tests before being granted exemption status. Obtaining a military exemption is radically different for exemptions from serving for homosexual and heterosexual young men. For heterosexuals, exemption means saving 2 years of youth, getting married, and the chance for education and finding a job. However, for homosexuals, although it leads to a fleeting moment of tranquility and security, it is quickly followed by alleviation of stress caused by living amongst people who may attack them. This short-lived relief is also rapidly followed by employment's big issue. One of the consequences that is starkly felt by the card-bearer who is seeking employment is that their military exemption now renders finding a job extremely difficult. This card makes the individual unmarketable. Mental illness or personality disorder will be mentioned as the reasons on the exemption card. The personality disorder is quickly surmised as a euphemism for homosexuality. Sometimes the card shows the compatible regulation number under which the exemption is issued. It would therefore be very easy to verify the reason underlying the exemption. As many recruiters and employees are reluctant to have homosexual men on staff, securing employment could become truly arduous for exempted gays. Exempted card-carrying gay men will have difficulties securing work in governmental sectors or at any governmental company, entity, or organization. This clearly will have economic consequences. Stigma and discrimination based on sexual orientation that is essentially announced on the card can result in less disposable income and earnings and fewer employment opportunities for people who are LGBT. Iranian authorities may prefer to remain tight-lipped about the prevailing of homosexuality in Iran, but it may be safe to assume that when it comes to mandatory military service, the closet is wide open.